Sometimes the night you almost didn't show up becomes the one that changes everything. The diner hummed with the low buzz of a dying shift, neon lights flickering against rain-streaked windows, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap fries hanging in the air as Emily Carter tied her apron tighter. Already exhausted before the clock even hit 9 p.m., she wasn't supposed to be here tonight. This shift belonged to a girl who had begged her last minute to cover, and Emily had said yes without thinking, like she always did. Because saying no was a luxury she couldn't afford, rent was 3 days overdue. Her little brother's prescription sat unopened on the kitchen counter, and every hour mattered, every dollar counted. So she stepped behind the counter, forced a small smile, and told herself it was just another night, just another table, just another customer, until the door chimed and he walked in, alone, quiet, dressed in something simple but not quite right, like someone trying to disappear into a life that didn't belong to him. He chose the corner booth without looking around, sat down slowly, and for a moment didn't even open the menu, just stared at the table like he'd forgotten why he came. Emily noticed that first, then the way his hands rested still but controlled, not restless like most late-night customers, not rough like someone who worked with them. No, there was something precise about him, something practiced. She grabbed a coffee pot and walked over. Just coffee? She asked, keeping her tone light. He nodded once, barely meeting her eyes. Black, he said, voice low, steady, but carrying something heavy underneath. She poured it, watched him take a sip like it was the first warm thing he'd had in days. And when she turned to leave, she hesitated. Something about him didn't sit right. Not dangerous, just broken in a quiet way. She glanced back, then made a choice she couldn't really afford to make. 10 minutes later, she returned with a plate he didn't order, eggs, toast, something simple but hot, sliding it in front of him like it was nothing. Kitchen messed up an order, she lied softly. Hate to waste it. He looked at the plate, then at her, confusion flickering for a split second before something else took over, something deeper, something almost painful. I didn't, he started, but stopped, and Emily just shrugged, already turning away. On the house, she said, leaving a small folded receipt beneath the plate, and when he opened it, he found a handwritten note in blue ink. 3 simple words, "You need this." His fingers stilled on the paper, the diner noise faded around him, and for the first time since he walked in, he looked up, really looked at her, standing behind the counter pretending not to notice. And something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a crack in. Something carefully held together, and under his breath, almost to himself, he whispered, "What if everything you built was taken overnight?" Emily didn't hear it clearly, just caught the weight of it, the kind of sentence people don't say unless they mean it. And suddenly this wasn't just another shift anymore. This wasn't just another stranger, but she had no idea that by the time this night ended, the man in that booth wouldn't just disappear from her life. He would pull her into a world she never imagined, and everything she thought she understood about struggle, about power, about kindness, would be turned upside down. Emily tried to focus on the next table, on the clinking plates and the tired hum of late-night customers drifting in and out, but her attention kept slipping back to the corner booth, to the man who now ate slowly like every bite required thought, like food was not just food, but something heavier, something he had not allowed himself in a long time. And she could not explain why it bothered her, only that it did. That something about him felt misplaced in this cheap diner with flickering lights and sticky floors, like a photograph set in the wrong frame. She wiped down the counter harder than necessary, glancing up when his phone buzzed, the sound sharp in the quiet. He looked at it, but did not answer, his jaw tightening for a second before he turned the screen face down, and that was when she noticed it. The watch on his wrist, simple at a glance but too clean, too precise. The kind of thing you do not wear unless you are used to things working perfectly, not breaking, not failing. She had seen enough customers to know the difference. And yet here he was, ordering the cheapest thing on the menu, sitting like someone who had nowhere else to go. "You okay over there?" she asked before she could stop herself, walking back with the coffee pot. He looked up again, slower this time, as if returning from somewhere far away. "I am fine," he said, but his voice did not match the words, and Emily gave a small nod, refilling his cup even though it was still half full, just to have a reason to stand there a second longer. "You do not look fine," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating, and for a moment he almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it had been a long time since anyone had said something so direct without expecting anything in return. "Do you always say that to customers?" he asked, and she shrugged. "Only the ones who look like they forgot how to breathe." That did it. A faint exhale left him, something close to a laugh, but not quite, and he leaned back slightly, eyes drifting past her to the rain tapping against the window. "What if you spent years building something?" he said slowly, choosing each word. "And then one day you realized none of it was really yours to keep." Emily frowned, not fully understanding, but recognizing the feeling underneath it, the loss, the kind that does not show on the outside. "Then I guess," she said after a second, "you find out who you are without it." He looked at her again, really looked this time, like he was trying to decide if she actually believed that, or if it was just something people say to sound strong. "And if there is nothing left?" he asked, and Emily shook her head, a small smile pulling at her lips, tired but real. "There is always something left, you just do not see it yet." Silence settled between them, not awkward, just full, and for the first time that night, Daniel did not look like he was carrying the entire weight of his world alone, just a man sitting in a diner, listening, and Emily felt it too, that subtle shift, like the air had changed, like something important had just happened without anyone naming it. But before she could say anything else, the front door chimed again, a group of loud customers stumbling in, breaking the moment apart, and when she turned back after taking their order, the corner booth was empty, the plate cleared, the coffee untouched, and on the table, where the receipt had been, there was a single $10 bill and a folded piece of paper, her handwriting staring back at her. Except this time, beneath her words, there was another line she had not written. "You needed this too." Emily stood there longer than she should have, the noise of the diner fading into something distant as her eyes stayed fixed on the $10 bill and the folded receipt in her hand. The ink slightly smudged where his fingers must have held it, and she read the line again, slower this time. "You needed this too." The words landing differently now, heavier, like they were meant for something deeper than just a late-night meal. She did not know why it unsettled her, only that it did, because customers did not usually leave messages like that. They left tips, complaints, sometimes nothing at all, but not this, not something that felt like it was looking straight through her. She tucked the paper into her apron pocket almost instinctively, like it mattered more than it should, then forced herself back into motion, refilling cups, taking orders, smiling when she had to, but the rhythm fell off now, like she had stepped out of sync with everything around her, and when the shift finally ended a little after midnight, her feet ached and her shoulders burned, but her mind would not settle. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle as she stepped outside, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the cool air, the parking lot nearly empty except for a flickering streetlight and her old sedan waiting at the far end. She paused for a moment, looking back at the diner, at the booth where he had been sitting just hours ago, and it felt strange how someone could walk into your life for less than an hour and still leave something behind that refused to let go. She shook it off, telling herself it was nothing, just another customer, just another night. But even as she said it, her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers brushing against the folded receipt again. The next morning came too fast, sunlight cutting through the thin curtains of her small apartment, the hum of traffic already loud outside. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her phone as she scrolled through job listings she had already seen, already applied to, already been rejected from. The $10 bill sat on the table beside her, untouched, like she could not bring herself to spend it, like it was not just money anymore. And then her phone buzzed, a notification lighting up the screen. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. A news alert, bold headline. "Impossible to miss. Hayes Group CEO forced out overnight amid internal power shift." Her breath caught for a second, the name unfamiliar at first until she tapped the article, the image loading slowly. And there he was, the same man from the diner, but different, dressed in a tailored suit, standing in front of a wall of cameras, expression controlled, but eyes carrying that same quiet weight she had seen the night before. Daniel Hayes. The article read, billionaire, founder, one of the most powerful executives in the city, removed from his own company in a single board decision. The words blurred slightly as she tried to process it, her mind jumping back to the booth, the cheap coffee, the untouched phone, the sentence he had whispered. What if everything you built was taken overnight? And suddenly it was not just a sentence anymore. It was real. It had already happened, and Emily sat there, completely still, the room feeling smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted closer because that man, that billionaire CEO, had been sitting across from her just hours ago, eating food she gave him for free, reading a note she wrote without thinking, and leaving behind something she could not explain. She looked down at the receipt again, at her own handwriting, at his words beneath it, and for the first time, a question settled in her chest, quiet but impossible to ignore. Not who he was, not what he lost, but why, out of everyone in the city, he had walked into her diner, sat at her table, and looked at her like she was the only person who could see him. The rest of the morning felt unreal, like Emily was moving through someone else's life, while her own thoughts stayed stuck on a single moment from the night before. She tried to shake it off as she got ready for her next shift, tying her hair back, pulling on the same worn sneakers, but everything felt different now, heavier somehow, like the world had quietly revealed something it was not supposed to, and she could not unsee it. The diner looked the same when she walked in, same flickering lights, same smell of coffee and grease, same chipped counter, but she noticed things she had ignored before, the way customers rushed in and out without seeing each other, the way conversations stayed shallow, safe, forgettable, and it made that one conversation stand out even more, the one that had not been rushed, not shallow, not forgettable. "You look distracted," her manager said sharply from behind the register. Snapping her back, Emily forced a quick nod. "I am fine," she replied. But the words sounded hollow even to her, and the day moved on. Orders, plates, refills, small talk. But her hand kept brushing against the receipt in her pocket like it was grounding her, like it was proof that last night had actually happened. And then around noon, the door opened again, and for a split second her heart jumped, stupidly expecting to see him walk back in. But it was just another customer, just another face, and she exhaled quietly, telling herself she was being ridiculous. People like him did not come back to places like this. People like him did not come back at all, not after falling that far, not after losing something that big. But the thought lingered anyway. And later that afternoon, everything shifted again. It started small, a conversation at the counter, two customers talking in low voices, words slipping through between the clatter of dishes. They said he disappeared after the announcement. One of them said, "No one knows where he went." The other replied, and Emily's hand stilled for just a second, her attention sharpening without meaning to. "They are already replacing him." The first voice continued. "Board moves fast when there is that much money involved." Emily turned away quickly, pretending not to listen. But the words settled in, heavy and uncomfortable, because she had seen him, not in a boardroom, not on a stage, but sitting alone in a cheap diner, drinking coffee like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. And suddenly the distance between those two versions of him felt impossible to measure. Billionaire and stranger, powerful and lost, all at once, and it did not make sense. None of it did. Her shift dragged on longer than usual, every minute stretching, every second pulling her back to the same question. Why her? Why that diner? Why that night? And when it finally ended, she did not go straight home like she usually did. Instead, she found herself standing outside again, looking down the street, the city moving around her, busy, indifferent, unaware of how quickly everything could change. She pulled the receipt from her pocket, unfolding it slowly, reading the words again like they might mean something different this time. "You needed this too." And for the first time, she wondered if maybe it was not just about him. Maybe it was not just about what he lost. Maybe somehow, in a way she did not fully understand yet, that night had been meant for both of them. And just as that thought settled in, a sleek black car rolled slowly to a stop across the street, engine quiet, windows tinted. Out of place in a neighborhood like this, and Emily felt it instantly, that same shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before something changes, and she did not know why, but she could not look away. Emily did not move at first, her fingers still holding the edge of the receipt as the black car idled across the street. Too clean, too polished for a place like this, the kind of car that did not just appear without a reason, and something in her chest tightened, not fear exactly, but awareness, The kind that tells you a moment matters before you understand why. The driver's side door did not open. No one stepped out. The engine just stayed on, quiet and patient, like it was waiting, and Emily told herself to ignore it, to walk to her car, go home, forget all of this. But her feet did not listen. Instead, she stood there under the flickering light, watching, until the back door of the car finally opened, slow and deliberate. And for a second, she thought it would be someone else, someone official, someone who belonged to that world she had only seen through headlines and screens. But then he stepped out, same height, same posture, different somehow. Daniel Hayes did not look like the man from the diner anymore. His clothes were sharper now. A dark coat fitted perfectly, his hair no longer out of place. But the eyes were exactly the same, steady and heavy, like he had not slept, like nothing had really changed beneath the surface. Emily's breath caught before she could stop it, and he saw it. Of course he did, his gaze finding her immediately, like he had known exactly where she would be standing. "You should not be here," she said before she could think. The words slipping out quiet but firm, because this did not make sense. None of it did. People like him did not come back to places like this, not after everything that had just happened. But Daniel did not answer right away. He took a few steps closer, the sound of his shoes against the pavement the only thing breaking the silence. And when he stopped, there was still a distance between them, just enough to feel intentional. "I needed to find you," he said finally, his voice calm, controlled, but carrying something underneath it, something real, and Emily shook her head slightly, almost in disbelief. "Why?" she asked, not sharply, just honestly, because that was the question that had been sitting with her all day, growing heavier by the hour. Daniel glanced down for a second, like he was choosing how much to say, how much to reveal, then looked back at her, and this time there was no distance in his gaze, no guarded edge, just clarity. "Because you were the only person last night who did not see what I had," he said. "You saw what I needed." The words landed quietly, but they did not feel small. They felt like something opening, something shifting into place, and Emily felt it. That same subtle pull from the night before, stronger now, harder to ignore, but she did not step closer, did not soften immediately, because this was not simple. This was not just a stranger anymore. This was a man whose life existed on a scale she did not understand. A man who had lost something she could barely imagine, and now he was standing here, looking at her like she was part of the answer. "You left," she said instead, her voice steadier now. "You did not even say anything." And Daniel nodded once, accepting it without defense. "I know," he said. "I was not ready to stay." A pause settled between them, not empty, just full of everything that had not been said yet. The car still idling behind him, the city moving around them like nothing unusual was happening. And Emily realized something then, something quiet but undeniable. This moment, right here, was not an accident. It was not random. It was the continuation of something that had started the second she decided to cover that shift. And now it was asking something from her, something she was not sure she was ready to give. And before she could decide, Daniel reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something small, something familiar, and held it out to her without a word. And when she looked down, her breath caught again, because it was not money, not a card, not anything expensive. It was the receipt, her receipt, carefully unfolded, her handwriting still visible, and beneath it, his words, unchanged. "You needed this too." And suddenly, it did not feel like a message anymore. It felt like a question. Emily did not take the receipt right away, her eyes fixed on it in his hand like it carried more weight now than it had any right to. And for a second neither of them moved, the quiet stretching just enough to make everything feel sharper, more real. "You kept it," she said finally, her voice softer than before, and Daniel gave a small nod, not defensive, not proud, just honest. "I did not want to forget that moment," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made it clear. He was not talking about the food, not the coffee, not even the words themselves, but what had happened between them, something simple that had somehow mattered more than anything else that night. Emily let out a slow breath, stepping closer without fully realizing it, her fingers brushing against the edge of the paper before she took it from him, the familiar texture grounding her even as everything else felt uncertain. "You could have gone anywhere," she said, looking back up at him. "Any restaurant, Any place in the city, and you chose that diner. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, not guarded, but thoughtful, like he had asked himself that same question more than once. I did not choose it, he said quietly. I just ended up there, he paused, then added. But I think I need it. Too. Emily frowned a little, trying to understand what he meant, and he seemed to notice, because this time he did not hold back. When everything collapsed, he continued. I did not want to be anywhere that reminded me of who I was supposed to be. I needed somewhere that did not expect anything from me. His gaze met hers again, steady and clear. And you were the only person who did not expect anything. The words settled between them, heavier now, more defined, and Emily felt it again, that shift, that pull. But it came with something else this time, hesitation, because this was not just about kindness anymore. This was about stepping into something she did not fully understand. I am not part of your world, she said after a moment, not as a rejection, just as a truth, and Daniel nodded, accepting it without argument. I know, he said. That is why I am here. That made her pause, really pause, because it was not what she expected him to say, not the kind of answer someone like him was supposed to give. And for a second she did not know what to do with it. The street around them remained unchanged, cars passing, distant voices, the soft hum of the city continuing like nothing important was happening. But here, in this small space between them, everything felt different, like a decision was forming, not spoken yet, but close. And then Daniel reached into his coat again, slower this time, pulling out a small card, not flashy, not dramatic, just simple, and held it out. I am not asking you to trust me, he said, his voice steady. I am asking you to give me a chance to explain. Emily looked at the card but did not take it immediately, her mind moving through everything at once, the diner, the conversation, the article, the way he had looked at her like she mattered when he had nothing left, and something inside her shifted again, quieter this time but stronger, because this was not about him anymore, not entirely. It was about what that moment had meant, what it could mean, and slowly, without rushing it, she reached out and took the card from his hand, the contact brief but enough to make it real, and as she glanced down, seeing his name printed clearly, Daniel Hayes, along with an address she could not even imagine stepping into, she realized something she had not allowed herself to admit before. This was not over, not even close. This was only the beginning of something that was already changing both of them in ways neither of them fully understood yet. Emily stood there for a moment after he stepped back toward the car, the card still warm in her hand, the edges pressing lightly against her fingers like it was asking her to decide something she was not ready to name yet. Daniel did not wait for an answer. He simply gave a small nod, not distant, not rushed, just certain, as if he understood that whatever came next could not be forced, and then he turned, the car door closing softly behind him, the engine fading as it pulled away into the night, leaving her alone again under the flickering light. But it did not feel the same as before. It felt like something had been set in motion, something that would not simply disappear with distance or time. She exhaled slowly, looking down at the card again, tracing the printed address with her thumb, the numbers unfamiliar, the kind of place she had only seen in passing, glass buildings, quiet lobbies, people who moved like they belonged somewhere bigger, and for a second she almost laughed at the idea of herself walking into a place like that. But the feeling did not last, because beneath the doubt there was something else, something quieter but stronger, curiosity, not about his world, but about that moment they had shared, about why it had felt so real, so different from everything else. The next morning came with its usual routine, alarms, rushed coffee, the weight of responsibilities waiting before she even stepped out the door, but today it all felt slightly out of focus, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. She went through the motions, getting dressed, checking her phone, glancing at the small stack of bills on the counter, each one a reminder of why she could not afford distractions, why she had to stay grounded, practical, careful, and yet the card remained there, placed neatly beside the $10 bill. Impossible to ignore. She picked it up again, just for a second, telling herself she was only looking, only thinking, but her thoughts did not stay simple. They moved, drifting back to his words, to the way he had looked at her, not like someone beneath him, not like someone temporary, but like someone who mattered in that moment. And that was what made it harder to dismiss. because it had not felt like charity. It had not felt like a favor. It had felt like something shared, something equal. And that was rare, too rare to ignore completely. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back. Another message about work, another shift, another reminder that her life was not going to pause just because something unexpected had happened. She set the phone down, looking at the card one more time, then at the door, and for a moment everything felt balanced on a single choice. Stay where things made sense, where everything was predictable, even if it was difficult, or step into something uncertain, something she could not control, something that might change more than just her day, and she did not rush it. She let the silence settle, let the weight of it sit with her, because she understood something now that she had not before, that sometimes the hardest decisions were not about right or wrong, but about whether you were willing to see what was waiting on the other side. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she reached for her keys, the card still in her hand, and as she stepped out into the morning light, the city already alive around her, she did not know exactly what she was walking toward, only that whatever it was, it had already started the moment she said yes to a shift that was never supposed to be hers. The drive felt longer than it should have. Even though the address on the card was less than 20 minutes away, Emily's hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel as the streets shifted from familiar to something else entirely. The worn storefronts and cracked sidewalks slowly giving way to clean glass buildings and quiet intersections where everything seemed controlled, deliberate, like nothing happened by accident here. She almost turned around twice, once at a red light that stayed just a little too long, and again when she saw the building itself, tall and reflective, the kind of place where people did not hesitate before walking in. But she did, sitting in her car for a moment, engine still running. Her reflection staring back at her from the window, simple clothes, tired eyes, someone who clearly did not belong in a place like this. And yet the card was still in her hand, grounding her, reminding her that this was not random, that she had been invited, even if she did not fully understand why. She finally stepped out, the air quieter here, the city noise softened, like even the sound respected the space. The lobby doors opened automatically as she approached, smooth and effortless, and the shift was immediate. Polished floors, soft lighting, a faint scent of something clean and expensive, people moving with purpose, voices low and controlled. Emily slowed her steps without meaning to, suddenly aware of every detail. The way her shoes sounded against the floor, the way her jacket felt too thin, too out of place, and for a second she considered turning back, telling herself this was a mistake, that she had crossed into something that was not hers to step into. But before she could act on it, a voice reached her, calm and professional. "Miss Carter." She turned, surprised, to see a woman standing a few feet away, composed, polite, but clearly expecting her, and that alone was enough to shift something inside her, because this meant he had planned this. He had expected her to come. "Yes," Emily answered, her voice steady even if her thoughts were not. The woman gave a small nod, gesturing toward a set of elevators. "He is waiting for you," she said simply, and there was no question of who she meant. Emily followed without speaking, the elevator ride silent except for the soft hum of movement, each floor number lighting up one by one. And with every second, the reality of what she was doing settled in deeper. This was not just curiosity anymore. This was a step, a choice, something that would not be undone easily. When the doors opened, the space beyond was quieter, more private. Large windows stretching across the far wall, the city visible below like something distant and controlled. And he was there, standing near the glass, not behind a desk, not surrounded by people, just standing, hands resting lightly in his coat pockets, looking out like he had been there for a while. And when he turned, his expression did not show surprise, only recognition, like this moment had already existed before it happened. "You came," he said, not as a question, just a statement, and Emily felt it again. That same quiet shift that had followed her from the diner to this place. She took a few steps forward, stopping just enough to keep the space between them. "You said you wanted to explain," she replied, holding his gaze, and Daniel nodded slowly, the faintest hint of something softer in his expression. Not relief exactly, but something close. "I did," he said, his voice steady, but no longer distant, "and I think you deserve the truth." The words settled into the room, clear and direct, And Emily realized then that whatever he was about to say was not going to be simple, not something she could walk away from unchanged. And for the first time since she stepped into the building, she did not feel out of place. She felt exactly where she was supposed to be. Daniel did not rush into speaking, and that alone made Emily more aware of the moment. The quiet stretching between them, not awkward but deliberate, like he understood that whatever he was about to say could not be undone once it was spoken. He took a slow breath, glancing briefly toward the city below before returning his attention to her. "Everything you saw in that article," he began, his voice calm but stripped of the distance it carried before. "It is true, but it is not the whole truth." Emily remained still, her eyes fixed on him, not interrupting, not reacting yet, because something told her this was only the surface. "I built Hayes Group from nothing," he continued. "Not overnight, not by accident, but over years of work, decisions, risks that most people would never take." His tone was not proud, just factual, like he was stating something that no longer belonged to him. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing who I was becoming while I was building it." Emily felt that, not the scale of it, but the idea, the quiet loss that can happen without warning. He took another breath, slower this time. "The board did not remove me because I failed," he said. "They removed me because I stopped playing the game the way they wanted." Emily's brow furrowed slightly, and he saw it, nodding once. "There are decisions I refuse to make, people I refuse to push aside, things I would not turn into numbers on a report." His gaze held hers, steady, unguarded. "And in that world, that makes you replaceable." The words settled into the space, not dramatic, just real, and Emily felt something shift inside her, a different understanding forming. Because this was not just about money or power, it was about choice, about what someone was willing to lose to keep something else intact. "So they took it," he added quietly. "Everything I built, everything I thought defined me." A pause followed, not empty, but full of what he was not saying. And Emily realized this was the part most people would never hear, the part behind the headlines, behind the clean version of events. "And that night," he continued, softer now, "I did not know who I was without it." His eyes moved slightly, not away from her, but through something, like he was remembering it as he spoke. "I walked into that diner because it was the first place that did not expect anything from me, and I sat down because I did not know what else to do." Emily's grip on the receipt tightened slightly, the memory of that moment aligning with his words. "And then you did something that did not fit into that world at all," he said, his voice shifting just enough to make it clear this mattered. "You gave without asking, without calculating, without needing anything back." Emily shook her head slightly, almost instinctively. "It was just food," she said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was not that simple. Daniel's expression softened, not in disagreement, but in understanding. "It was not just food," he replied. "It was the first honest moment I had in a long time." Silence followed again, but this time it felt different, like something had been placed between them, something real, something that could not be ignored. Emily exhaled slowly, her thoughts moving through everything he had said, trying to find where she fit into it, what this meant for her, because this was no longer just his story. It was becoming something shared, whether she wanted it or not. "So why me?" she asked finally, her voice steady but quieter now, not defensive, just searching. Daniel did not hesitate this time, his answer immediate, clear. "Because you reminded me of something I lost before they ever took the company," he said, and that was when it shifted again, deeper this time, because this was not about business anymore, not about power or failure. It was about something more personal, something that had been gone long before the headlines ever appeared, and Emily felt it. That moment where everything changes direction, where the story stops being what you thought it was and becomes something else entirely, and she knew, without needing him to say it yet, that whatever came next was not going to be simple, not going to be easy, but it was going to matter in a way she could not walk away from. Emily did not respond immediately, not because she did not understand what he said, but because she did, and that made it harder, the weight of his words settling into something she could not easily dismiss or explain away. She looked down for a moment, her fingers lightly pressing against the folded receipt still in her hand, grounding herself before she spoke again. "You are talking about something bigger than a diner, bigger than one night." she said quietly, lifting her eyes back to him. So do not make it sound like I changed everything, because I did not. Daniel watched her carefully, not interrupting, not correcting, just listening in a way that felt different from most people. And when she finished, he gave a small nod, acknowledging her point without stepping away from his own. You did not change everything, he said, his voice steady. But you changed what mattered in that moment. Emily let out a breath she did not realize she was holding, the tension in her shoulders, easing slightly, but not disappearing, because this was still unfamiliar territory, still something she did not fully trust. And what happens now? She asked, her tone more grounded now, more cautious, because she needed clarity, not just meaning. Daniel took a step closer, not enough to close the space completely, but enough to make the conversation feel more direct, more real. Now I rebuild, he said simply, no hesitation, no doubt, just certainty, and there was something different in him. When he said it, not the man from the article, not the man from the diner, but something in between, something forming, but not the same way, he added, his gaze steady on hers. Not with the same rules. Not with the same priorities. Emily studied him for a moment, trying to understand what that meant in real terms, not just in words. You are going to start over, she said, more as a realization than a question, and he nodded. Yes, he replied. But I am not starting from nothing. That caught her attention, her brow furrowing slightly. Then what are you starting from? She asked, and this time, there was no pause, no hesitation. From that moment, he said, his voice quieter but more certain than before. From what I felt when you did something honest without expecting anything back. Emily blinked slightly, the simplicity of the answer conflicting with the scale of everything else she knew about him. That is not a business plan, she said, a faint edge of disbelief in her tone, and for the first time, Daniel allowed the smallest hint of a smile, not amused, just aware. No, he agreed, but it is a direction. The words hung there, and Emily felt the shift again, not dramatic, but undeniable, because this was no longer about his past. It was about what he was choosing to build next, and somehow, whether she wanted it or not, she was part of that direction. And where do I fit into that? She asked, more directly now, because she needed to understand her place in this, not just in theory, but in reality. Daniel's expression grew more serious, not distant, but intentional. I am not asking you to fit into anything, he said. I am asking you to help shape it. Emily went still for a second, the meaning of that settling in deeper than she expected, because that was different. That was not an offer of help or support. It was something else entirely, something that required trust, involvement, risk. You barely know me, she said, her voice quieter now, but steady, and Daniel nodded again. That is exactly why, he replied. Because you are not part of the system that broke everything. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was full of possibility, of uncertainty, of something that could go in more than one direction, and Emily felt it clearly now. This was the moment where things either stayed as they were or moved into something new, something unpredictable, and as she stood there, looking at him, holding that small piece of paper that had somehow connected two completely different worlds, she realized something she had not admitted before. This was not just his second chance, it might be hers too. And the question was no longer whether she believed him, but whether she was willing to believe in something she had never imagined for herself. Emily felt the weight of his words settle into something real, not just an idea, not just a possibility, but something that required a decision, and she did not answer right away because she understood now that whatever she said next would not just affect him, it would change her too. She turned slightly, walking a few steps toward the window, the city stretching out below her, endless, structured, controlled, a world she had never imagined being part of, and yet here she was, standing above it, being asked to step into something she did not fully understand. You are asking me to walk into a life I have never lived, she said quietly, her reflection faint in the glass, and trust that I will not lose myself in it. Daniel did not interrupt. He stayed where he was, giving her the space to think, to question, to doubt, because he knew this was not something that could be rushed. I am not asking you to change who you are, he replied after a moment, his voice steady but softer now. I am asking you to stay exactly who you are, because that is the only reason this works. Emily let that sit with her, the simplicity of it, the honesty of it. And for a second she almost believed it could be that simple. But she knew better. Nothing about this is simple, she said, turning back to face him, her expression more grounded now, more certain. Your world is not built for people like me. Daniel nodded slowly, not denying it, not trying to soften it. You are right, he said. It is. Not. And that honesty caught her off guard more than anything else, because she expected reassurance, expected him to say it would be easy. But he did not. He let the truth stand as it was. Then why would I step into it? She asked, not challenging him, just needing to hear the answer clearly. And this time he stepped closer, closing part of the distance between them, not enough to overwhelm. Just enough to make the moment feel direct. Because it does not have to stay that way, he said, his eyes steady on hers. Because if I am going to rebuild something, I want it to be different, and I cannot do that with the same people who built it the first time. Emily studied him carefully, searching for anything that felt uncertain, anything that felt like a promise he could not keep. But she did not find it. What she saw was someone who had already lost everything that defined him, and was now choosing what mattered next. And that was not something she could easily dismiss. And you think I can help you do that? She said, quieter now, not defensive, just thoughtful. Daniel did not hesitate. I know you can, he replied, and there was no pressure in his voice, no expectation, just belief, simple and direct, and that was what made it harder to ignore. Emily looked down at the receipt again, at the words that had somehow carried them to this moment, and she realized something she had been avoiding. This was not about stepping into his world. It was about deciding whether she wanted to be part of something new, something that did not exist yet, something that could fail just as easily as it could succeed. And that uncertainty should have scared her, should have pushed her to walk away, to stay where things were predictable. But instead, it did something else. It made her feel something she had not felt in a long time. Possibility, and slowly, without rushing it, she looked back up at him, her expression no longer guarded, no longer uncertain, but not fully decided either. If I say yes, she said carefully, this is not just about helping you. This is about building something that actually matters. Daniel nodded immediately. That is exactly what this is, he said, and the clarity of it left no room for misunderstanding, and Emily felt it then. The shift from hesitation to something else, not confidence, not certainty, but willingness, and sometimes that was enough. She took a small step forward, closing the remaining space between them, not dramatically, just enough to show that she was no longer standing outside of it. Then I will listen, she said, her voice steady, grounded, real. But I am not promising anything yet. Daniel's expression softened slightly, not in disappointment, but in understanding. That is all I am asking, he replied. And for the first time since she walked into that building, the tension eased, not completely, but enough to make space for what came next, because this was no longer about whether she belonged in his world. It was about whether they could create something that neither of them had ever had before. The conversation did not end there. It shifted, slowly but deliberately, from questions to something more grounded, something that could actually exist beyond that room. Daniel moved toward the table near the window, not with urgency, but with intention, and for the first time Emily noticed the details she had missed before. Papers spread out, but not chaotic, sketches of ideas rather than finished plans. Notes written by hand instead of polished presentations. It was not the office of someone holding power. It was the space of someone rebuilding it. I do not want another company that only measures profit, he said, picking up one of the pages but not looking at it, his attention still on her. I want something that measures impact, something that actually changes how people are treated, how decisions are made. Emily stepped closer, not drawn by the papers but by the way he spoke, because this was not the language she expected from someone like him. It was not distant or calculated. It was personal. That sounds good, she said carefully, her tone thoughtful. But a lot of people say things like that when they start over. It does not mean they follow through. Daniel nodded, not defensive, not surprised. You are right, he said. Words are easy, especially in my world. He set the paper down, his expression more focused now. That is why I do not want this to come from me alone. Emily crossed her arms slightly, not closed off, just grounded. So what does that mean for me? She asked, and Daniel did not hesitate. It means you tell me when something is wrong, even if no one else does, he said. It means you question decisions that look good on paper, but do not feel right in reality. It means you bring perspective that I cannot buy or build with experience alone. Emily let out a quiet breath, absorbing that, because it was not a role she had ever been offered before, not a title, not a position, but a responsibility, something that required more than just showing up. You are asking me to challenge you, she said, and Daniel gave a small nod. Yes, he replied. Because if I build something new and it becomes the same as before, then losing everything will have meant nothing. The words carried weight, not just ambition but consequence, and Emily felt that. The seriousness of it, the fact that this was not about proving something to others. It was about proving something to himself. She walked slowly around the table, looking at the notes, the rough outlines, the beginnings of something that did not yet have a clear shape, and for the first time, she did not feel out of place looking at them. She felt involved, even if she had not agreed to anything yet. And what happens if I say no? She asked quietly, turning back to him, and Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. Then I respect that, he said, and I still rebuild, just without the one person who reminded me why it matters. There was no pressure in his voice, no attempt to convince her, just honesty, and somehow that made the decision heavier, not lighter. Emily looked down again at the receipt still in her hand, at the simple words that had started all of this, and she realized something she had not fully understood until now. This was not about stepping into his world. It was about whether she was willing to bring her own into something bigger, something uncertain, something that could fail but also change more than just her own life. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle into something clear, not perfect, not certain, but clear enough. And when she looked back up, there was a quiet shift in her expression, not dramatic, not rushed, just resolved in a way that did not need to be spoken out loud yet, because the moment itself already carried the answer, and Daniel saw it. The subtle change, the difference in how she stood, how she looked at him, not from the outside anymore, but from somewhere closer, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, he felt something steady return, not control, not power, but direction, and it was not coming from a boardroom or a deal. It was coming from a single choice that had started in a place no one would have expected. Emily did not speak right away, not because she was uncertain anymore, but because she understood that some decisions did not need to be rushed into words to be real. She folded the receipt carefully, smoothing it once before placing it on the table between them, not as something small, but as something that had carried them both from a quiet moment in a diner to this exact point. And when she looked back up at Daniel, there was no hesitation left in her expression, only clarity shaped by everything she had seen and felt. If I do this, she said slowly, her voice steady but grounded in something deeper now. It has to stay real, not just in the beginning, not just when it is easy, but when it gets complicated, when it stops looking good on paper. Daniel did not interrupt, his attention fully on her, not trying to control the moment, just allowing it to unfold as it needed to. I am not interested in being part of something that turns into the same thing you just walked away from, she continued, her tone firm but not defensive. So if I am in this, I am in it fully, and I expect the same from you. The words settled into the room with a quiet weight, not dramatic, not confrontational, just honest in a way that did not leave space for misunderstanding, and Daniel nodded without hesitation, not as agreement for the sake of keeping her there, but because he recognized the truth in what she was asking. That is exactly why I came back, he said, his voice steady. Because I do not want to rebuild something that looks successful but feels empty. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for any sign of doubt, any hesitation that might weaken what he was saying, but she did not find it. What she saw instead was someone who had already lost everything that mattered in the wrong way, and was choosing carefully what to build in the right one, and that was enough, not perfect, not guaranteed, but enough to take the next step. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing in a way that felt unfamiliar, because it was not relief, it was commitment, quiet, but real. Then I will do it, she said, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than anything else she could have added. Daniel did not react immediately, not with excitement or surprise, but with something steadier, something deeper, like he understood what that decision actually meant, not just for the project, but for both of them. "We build it together," he replied, not as a promise, but as a direction, and Emily gave a small nod, accepting that without needing more. The city stretched out behind them, unchanged, still moving at the same pace, still filled with people who would never know how something like this started, how a single moment, a small act of kindness, could shift the direction of two completely different lives. And yet it had, quietly, without announcement, without recognition. And as they stood there, not as a waitress and a billionaire, not as strangers separated by everything that once defined them, but as two people choosing something new, the distance between their worlds no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like something they had already crossed, and on the table between them, the receipt remained, simple, unremarkable to anyone else, but carrying the proof of where it all began. A reminder that sometimes the most important changes do not start with power or plans, but with a moment where someone chooses to see another person clearly. And in doing so, changes everything that comes after.